Let's talk about something that catches a lot of people off guard. When the guy who ghosted you, walked away, or simply drifted into silence comes back. Maybe it's a text that says, "Hey stranger," or a fire emoji on your story. Maybe it's something more direct like, "I've been thinking about you." And suddenly you're left wondering, what does this mean? Why now? What is he trying to do? Let me tell you exactly what's happening and why he's testing you after no contact. Men test after no contact for one powerful reason. They want to see if they still have access. They want to know if the version of you they left behind is still waiting. It's not always malicious, and it's not always planned, but it is almost always driven by ego. When someone reaches out after disappearing, it's not always because they've had some deep epiphany about love. A lot of times, it's because they felt your absence, and that absence became uncomfortable. See, in the beginning, walking away feels easy like freedom. They tell themselves, "I need space, I'm not ready," or worse, "there's someone else." But when you actually give them space, real, dignified space, and you don't chase, you don't beg, and you don't play the prove your worth game, that silence starts to echo, and that's when the test comes. The test can be subtle, a random message that carries no emotional weight, a double tap on your photo, a breadcrumb, the goal, to see if you'll bite. If you rush to respond, get emotionally invested again, ask where he's been, or reopen the door without boundaries, he gets the answer he's looking for. Yes, I still have access. That tells him he can come and go as he pleases. That the silence didn't cost him anything. That you're still emotionally available, even when he hasn't earned that access back. But if you've grown during no contact, if you've healed, reflected, and started choosing peace over chaos, you'll respond differently. Not with anger, not with ego, but with clarity. You'll recognize the test, and instead of reacting, you'll evaluate. What is he really offering me? Is this about reconnection, or about reassurance for him? People don't just test you to see who you are, they test to see if you've changed. And if you show him the same version of you he knew before, the one that was available, no matter how he behaved, he'll slot you right back into his emotional storage box. But if he senses that something is different, that your self-respect got louder than your longing, then suddenly you're the one in control. And here's the truth most people won't tell you. When a man truly regrets losing you, he won't test you, he'll show up. He won't breadcrumb, he'll bring clarity. He won't give you a vague apology, he'll own what happened. Testing only happens when he's unsure of his own intentions, but still wants to know if you're there. So the next time someone comes back from the silence and drops that casual "hey," don't ask what it means. Ask yourself, what do I want? What do I deserve? Because this isn't about his test, it's about your answer. And your answer sets the tone for everything that comes next. When a man reappears after a period of no contact, his first instinct is often to test the waters. But this test isn't always about rekindling something genuine. It's usually about one thing, seeing if he still has emotional access to you. That access is a quiet form of control. It means he can reach out even lightly and still get a response. It's not always planned or malicious, but it's often subconscious. He's checking if the version of you he left behind is still waiting there, emotionally open, emotionally loyal, and emotionally tied to him even after silence. When someone walks away or disappears, especially without proper closure, there's often an unspoken assumption that you'll still be available when they return. That assumption gives them comfort. They don't have to face the full consequence of leaving if they know they can circle back and pick up where they left off. This kind of behavior happens because we all seek reassurance in different ways. For some men, especially those who are unsure of their own emotions or emotionally avoidant, the reassurance isn't about love. It's about knowing they didn't lose all their power. They don't necessarily want to come back fully. They just want to know they could if they chose to. And so, he sends the text. He reacts to a story. He reaches out in a way that doesn't risk vulnerability. That little ping is less about connection and more about confirmation. Are you still emotionally hooked? Are you still affected by him? Have you moved on, or are you still hoping? The test is about validation. If you respond quickly, if you seem eager or overly available, you send a signal that the emotional bond on your side hasn't broken. That his silence didn't shift anything in your feelings, and to someone who's testing you, that's enough. He doesn't need to pursue you fully. He just wanted to know the door was still unlocked. If it is, he can relax. He knows he didn't lose you entirely. He knows that when or if he wants to come back in a more serious way, the foundation will still be there. But if he reaches out and senses a shift in you, if your response is calm, neutral, or reflective of a woman who's gained clarity and composure, that unsettles him. He doesn't have the access he once did. He can't just walk back in and assume your emotions are still centered around him. A man who's truly into you doesn't test to see if you're still emotionally available. He communicates because he values you and wants to build something real. The test is what happens when someone wants to hold on to a version of you that no longer exists, especially if you've grown in their absence. When you give space and don't chase, you give him a chance to see what life is like without your energy. If he truly felt the loss, he'll approach with honesty, clarity, and effort, not games, not breadcrumbing, not vague messages designed to spark your attention without giving you real connection. When a man reaches out after a period of silence, the way he does it often reveals more than what he says. The test rarely comes in the form of a meaningful conversation or a deep emotional confession. Instead, it's subtle, vague, and low effort. He might send a casual "hey," respond to a social media post with an emoji, or ask a random question that doesn't require much engagement. This kind of communication isn't accidental, it's intentional. It's the safest possible move to see if you're still emotionally available without risking rejection. If you were truly ready to reconnect in a genuine, committed way, he'd make that obvious. But a vague message gives him the illusion of reaching out while protecting his ego from the consequences of being ignored. Low-effort communication allows him to keep his pride intact. He wants to know if the door is still open without fully stepping through it. That's the psychology behind these kinds of tests. He doesn't want to invest real vulnerability, real time, or real energy until he knows it's safe. And so, he throws out a small hook to see if you'll bite. If you respond quickly, warmly, and with interest, he gets the answer he's looking for. He still matters to you. That validation in many cases is all he really wanted. Not a relationship, not a conversation. Just proof that he's still lingering in your heart and your mind. These vague messages serve another purpose. They give him control over the pace and depth of the interaction. By keeping things light and unclear, he avoids responsibility. If you ask him where he's been or what he really wants, he can brush it off or say you're reading too much into it. This allows him to test your interest without offering clarity about his own. It creates confusion and keeps you emotionally invested while he remains emotionally distant. The real danger here isn't just the message. It's how much time and energy you give trying to decode it. The more you try to interpret his vague actions, the more power you give to someone who hasn't earned your emotional investment. These small breadcrumbs are rarely about rebuilding anything substantial. They're about feeding a fragile ego or keeping you on the back burner. A man who truly wants to re-enter your life in a meaningful way won't communicate through cryptic texts or passive likes. He'll call, he'll reach out directly, he'll acknowledge the silence and take responsibility for his absence. Vague messages might feel like hope, but they're often just placeholders designed to stir your emotions without offering anything real. When you give too much weight to those kinds of interactions, you end up doing the emotional work he should be doing. You start questioning your own worth based on how often he texts instead of questioning whether those texts actually mean something. It's important to remember that effort speaks, clarity speaks. Real intention doesn't hide behind emojis or one-word texts. A man who is serious about reconnecting after no contact will not risk being misunderstood because he knows what you're worth. When a man tests you after no contact, and you respond emotionally or too eagerly, you're unintentionally showing him that nothing has changed. You might think you're being open, kind, or simply polite, but to someone who's unsure of what they want or who left without clarity, that warm reception signals that your heart is still in the same place he left it. It tells him that the distance didn't affect your loyalty, your feelings, or your standards. He now knows that he can disappear, go silent, and still come back to find the same version of you waiting. That realization gives him a sense of comfort and control. It means he can keep you emotionally near without offering anything new, anything better, or anything more honest. Most people don't see it this way at first. They think, maybe if I respond kindly, he'll see my value again. But the truth is, your immediate and enthusiastic response doesn't always register as attractive. It registers as availability. And when someone doesn't have to earn your attention, they stop valuing it. A man who hasn't done the work to repair what broke, who hasn't made any effort to regain your trust or emotional safety, now feels reassured that his absence didn't cost him your presence. That can lead to a repeat of the same cycle. He shows up halfway, you respond with full presence, and the pattern begins again. Emotion doesn't always mean weakness, but when it's given without boundaries, especially to someone who disappeared, it sends the message that your self-worth is still tied to their return. That makes it easier for them to come and go. They learn that silence doesn't change the dynamic, and if they ever feel uncertain or lonely again, they know where to turn for instant reassurance. This doesn't just delay your healing, it distorts it. You start questioning yourself. Did I overreact? Did I expect too much? Should I just be grateful he's reaching out? But real self-respect means understanding that not everyone who reappears deserves the same version of you they once knew. When you respond with too much emotion, you're doing the emotional heavy lifting. You're taking responsibility for making the conversation feel meaningful, for bridging the gap he created, for holding the weight of what's unsaid. That kind of effort should be mutual. When it's not, it leaves you drained, confused, and doubting whether your expectations are too high. But they're not. They're just being placed in the wrong hands. If someone truly values you, they will step into the space they once abandoned with clarity, effort, and vulnerability, not vague messages or breadcrumb affection. Your growth during no contact isn't just about silence. It's about the transformation that happens inside you. If you've changed, your standards must change too. A part of that change is learning how to hold your emotional power, especially when someone tries to pull you back into an old dynamic without proving they've grown. You're not being cold by protecting your energy, you're being wise with your worth. When a man genuinely regrets losing you, his behavior after no contact looks very different from someone who's just testing the waters. He doesn't come back with vague messages, low-effort attempts, or half-hearted emojis. He comes back with clarity. Real regret doesn't play games or seek validation. It doesn't look like a test. It looks like accountability. A man who truly feels the weight of your absence isn't looking for reassurance that you're still there. He's trying to show you that he's changed. That's the key difference. One is about soothing his ego. The other is about rebuilding your trust. And the men who are serious about that don't rely on passive gestures. They approach with intention, humility, and a desire to repair what was broken, not just reconnect for their own comfort. Clarity is a hallmark of real emotional maturity. It's not about being perfect or knowing exactly what to say, but it is about being honest. When someone misses you and understands the cost of losing you, they don't risk confusing you again. They're not vague about why they're back. They don't want to leave any room for misinterpretation. They tell you they were wrong. They admit the silence was hurtful. They ask where you are emotionally, not just to get back in your life, but to understand how you feel now after everything. That kind of man doesn't test your emotional availability because he respects it too much. He knows that if he walked away or disappeared, your forgiveness isn't guaranteed. And instead of trying to sneak past the discomfort of that truth, he stands in it. That's what real regret does. It takes responsibility, not shortcuts. When someone comes back without clarity, it's usually because they haven't done the emotional work. They haven't reflected on the impact of their absence. They may miss you, but they haven't taken the time to figure out what they actually want or what they're willing to offer this time around. That's where a lot of people get hurt. They confuse missing you with valuing you. The truth is, someone can miss your energy, your presence, your love, and still not be ready to give you what you deserve. Regret without action is just nostalgia. It's easy to romanticize someone's return because it validates your hope. But if there's no clarity behind their words, then you're right back where you started. Guessing, waiting, hoping. The distinction matters because how a man returns sets the tone for everything that follows. If he comes back with confusion, you'll feel uncertain. If he comes back with intention, you'll feel safe. Clarity is not just a sign of maturity, it's a sign of respect. It shows that he values your time, your heart, and your boundaries enough not to waste them again. And if he doesn't bring that kind of energy, then he's not truly ready. Wanting you back isn't enough. Knowing why he lost you and what needs to change to earn another chance, that's what tells you whether this is regret or just emotional convenience. Growth during no contact is what changes the entire dynamic between you and someone who left or disappeared. It's not just about staying silent or resisting the urge to text first. It's about who you become in that space. When someone walks away from you, especially without clarity or respect, your first instinct may be to fix it, to chase, to prove your worth. But when you choose instead to sit in the discomfort, to face your feelings without reaching out, and to focus on yourself, something powerful begins to shift. You stop centering them and start returning to yourself. That growth doesn't just affect how you feel, it transforms how you respond when they come back. Suddenly, you're not emotionally waiting, you're observing, you're not reacting, you're evaluating. The man who once felt confident in your emotional availability now senses something different. You're not bitter, but you're not needy either. You're not cold, but you're not desperate for his attention. You've rebuilt your energy, your clarity, your self-worth, and that shift is felt. It's not something you have to explain. It shows in the way you respond. You no longer hand over your attention just because he reappeared. You don't leap at the chance to restart the connection without understanding what's changed. That's what real growth looks like. It shows up as emotional control, healthy detachment, and clear boundaries. When a man tests you after no contact, he's often expecting the same version of you he left behind. He's expecting to be met with open arms, warmth, or curiosity. But when he's met with calm, composure, and strength, it throws him off. He realizes that the emotional access he once had isn't automatic anymore. That growth forces him to see you in a new light. It challenges him to rise to your new standard, or leave, because when you evolve, You stop being a participant in your old patterns. You no longer entertain mixed signals, half-effort messages, or emotional breadcrumbs. Your silence wasn't just a pause, it was preparation. Preparation to become someone who doesn't just receive love, but chooses who is worthy of her love. That's why growth during no contact is so powerful. It's not about waiting for him to miss you. It's about becoming someone who no longer waits. It's about building a life, a mindset, and a sense of self so strong that his return doesn't shake you. It gets filtered through your new lens of self-respect. You begin to ask better questions, not why did he leave, but do I even want this version of him back? And not what does this message mean, but does this communication reflect the kind of relationship I want? You begin to notice the difference between attention and intention, between being missed and being valued. And you realize that not every man who comes back deserves a second chance, especially if the woman he's returning to is no longer the same. Growth changes what you accept. It sharpens your standards, deepens your self-awareness, and protects you from falling back into dynamics that don't honor the person you've become. The way you respond to a man's test after no contact doesn't just reflect your current emotions. It defines whether he respects you or repeats the same pattern. That first moment when he reaches out again, even casually, sets the tone for what comes next. If you respond immediately, with warmth or longing, it communicates that you're still emotionally tied to him and that the gap in contact didn't create any change in the balance of power. It tells him he can leave and return as he pleases, and that your availability is constant regardless of his effort. For someone who hasn't done the work to grow or take accountability, that's an invitation to continue a dynamic where he holds control without offering clarity or commitment. Respect is earned through behavior, and patterns are broken through boundaries. If you respond to his return with curiosity but firmness, if you take your time, if you ask the right questions, you show him that he can no longer coast on charm or history. You're not emotionally punishing him, but you're also not letting him skip over the part where effort is required. That shift forces him to consider his actions differently. He has to decide, will he show up with intention, or will he retreat again? That decision tells you everything. If he's unwilling to rise to meet your new emotional standard, then you've saved yourself from repeating the same story. But if he senses that you're no longer the woman who accepts inconsistency, it challenges him to either grow or go. Men often test to see where they stand with you, especially if they are unsure of their own feelings or guilt ridden about the past. But how you respond gives them a mirror. It shows them who you are now. If they see strength, independence, and emotional balance, they realize they can't return on the same terms. Your energy doesn't feel like a guarantee anymore, it feels like a privilege. That change in dynamic is subtle, but it's powerful. It's the difference between being someone's fallback and being someone whose time and heart must be earned. The truth is, people only repeat what you allow. If someone disappeared once and was able to return to the same open door, they'll believe they can do it again. But if they come back and sense that the emotional rules have changed, that their access is no longer automatic, they're forced to reflect on their own behavior. And in that moment, they either respect your new standard or they remove themselves. Either outcome serves you. Because the goal isn't just to get someone back, it's to protect your peace, your growth, and your value. Every time you respond with clarity, self-respect, and composure, you send a clear message. Your worth is not up for negotiation. You're not afraid of being alone, and you're no longer choosing someone who left over the person you became while they were gone. You're choosing you, and that choice changes everything about how people treat you going forward. The way you respond to a man's test after no contact doesn't just reflect your current emotions. It defines whether he respects you or repeats the same pattern. That first moment when he reaches out again, even casually, sets the tone for what comes next. If you respond immediately with warmth, nostalgia, or eagerness, it communicates that you're still emotionally tied to him and that the gap in contact didn't create any shift in the balance of power. It tells him he can leave and return as he pleases and that your availability is constant regardless of his effort. For someone who hasn't done the work to grow, take accountability, or reflect on his choices, that's an open invitation to continue a dynamic where he holds control without offering clarity, consistency, or real emotional depth. People only treat you according to the boundaries you enforce, not the standards you wish for. And when a man comes back after silence, whether out of guilt, confusion, or convenience, he's testing whether the emotional door he once walked out of is still wide open. But this is your moment, not to prove your loyalty, but to prove your growth. If you respond with centeredness instead of craving, patience instead of pressure, and discernment instead of desperation, you shift the energy. You show him that your peace has become more important than his attention. And that shift is what makes him realize that the emotional access he once had is no longer free. Respect is not begged for. It is earned through behavior, and it's reinforced through boundaries. If you respond to his return with curiosity, but also with calm distance, if you take your time, if you ask yourself, does this serve me? Before handing over your energy, you communicate that he no longer gets to skip steps. He no longer gets the privilege of intimacy without consistency. That moment becomes the fork in the road. He will either rise to meet your standard or retreat, and both outcomes are a gift. Because if he's not prepared to offer real presence, clarity, and effort, then his silence again will only protect you from further disappointment. And if he's serious, he will step forward with maturity, not mixed signals. Men who reappear often do so with curiosity, not commitment. They want to know if they still have a place in your heart, but not necessarily because they've decided to earn that place back. That's why your response matters more than his message. If your energy reflects stability, self-worth, and evolved boundaries, you'll see immediately what his true intentions are. Emotional maturity doesn't chase affection. It watches for alignment. It doesn't crave attention. It observes patterns. And it doesn't repeat cycles. It breaks them. You don't owe anyone your openness just because they decided to reappear. Closure doesn't always come in the form of an apology, and reconnection doesn't always lead to resolution. Sometimes your greatest power is in how you don't respond the way you used to. Silence, when rooted in strength, is louder than words. Delayed replies, thoughtful boundaries, and measured communication all serve as reminders that you're not stuck in the past. You've grown out of it. When a man tests the waters and sees that you're no longer the woman who hands out second chances to the same behavior, something shifts inside him. He realizes you're not waiting. You've moved forward. You've built a life where your value is no longer tied to whether or not someone sees it. You've learned to validate yourself, and that self-possession, that's magnetic, that's rare, that's what commands genuine respect, not just interest. Every time you respond with clarity, dignity, and self-protection, you send a message without having to say much at all. You've evolved. You're not here for temporary attention. You're not here for half, love, or breadcrumb energy. You're no longer flattered by the return of someone who left. You're focused on who shows up and stays. You've stopped choosing people based on who they used to be and started choosing based on who they consistently are. That shift doesn't just change the way men treat you. It changes the way you treat yourself. When a man is truly into you, he can't help but show it, even in the subtle, flirty behaviors he tries to hide. But recognizing those signs is only half the story. The real power lies in how you respond, because the version of you that knows her worth, honors her growth, and doesn't settle for mixed signals is the one who no longer waits to be chosen. She chooses